Welcome to the very first episode of Gaslit Nation for the year 2026, one of the most important years for the planet because the world will finally get to see whether American democracy prevails against Donald Trump and his MAGA crime cult. Will we still have the midterm elections? Will they be fair and free elections? Will Trump pull another January 6th to stay in power in 2028? These next few years are a major turning point for us here at home. And obviously, the way America goes, we're the largest military by far on this planet, one of the largest economies by far on this planet. So however things go here, this make it or break it year that we're all entering into together, it's going to have a massive, massive ripple effect. We are at the crossroads of history. Stick with Gaslit Nation and fight back and build a new American revolution out of the ashes of the MAGA cult. We're going to do this together, one act of hope and defiance at a time. That is how history is made. That is how progress is made. We are here because our ancestors, generations of fearless people, fought. They stared down the armies of nonsense and they built an all new era of hope and change. And it's now our turn. It is now our turn. And I'm very honored to do this with you in this very special bonus show made possible by and for our Patreon community that keeps Gaslit Nation going. I'm going to answer a question from one of our supporters at the Democracy Defender level and higher. If you would like to submit your questions to be featured here on the show, sign up at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. If you'd like to support our independent journalism, we love you and thank you so much to everyone who supports Gaslit Nation. We could not make this show without you. Let's hear what's on our listeners' minds. I got this message from Ken, last initial B. That's Ken B. Ken writes, I am a 65-year-old white man and love your Smart Fears podcast and agree with everything you're fighting for. Thank you so much for your excellent work. Thank you, Ken. That's extremely nice to hear. One topic I'd love to hear talked about more often on Gaslit Nation and other excellent podcasts is our endangered public lands. It seems to me that with Trump's recent repeal of the roadless rule and nonstop efforts to weaken our bedrock environmental laws, gut the National Park Service and National Forest Service, treasured wild places from Maine to Alaska are being positioned for looting. Absolutely right, Ken. Trump's mega donors hate the whole idea of national parks and forests and other such lands that belong to all Americans. Trump's mega donors want to carve up and exploit beloved places like North Cascades National Park and even iconic treasures like Yellowstone National Park. You cover so many important topics, but I'd be thrilled to hear you bring your wit and intelligence to bear on this important topic. Thank you. Well, I don't know about the wit, but I'll try to fire up the intelligence for this answer. And thank you so much for that brilliant and thoughtful question, Ken. Now, are you sitting down for this? I was recently in Washington, D.C., and not only did Trump put his name on the Kennedy Center, because that's the kind of tacky wannabe dictator that he is, Trump also put a big, scowling banner of himself, Dear Leader style, on the Francis Perkins Department of Labor next to President Teddy Roosevelt. And immediately when I saw that, I thought of your question, Ken, because Teddy Roosevelt, of course, was a great outdoorsman who significantly expanded our national parks, preserving wild lands, and he would be appalled by what Trump is doing. You know how pop stars like Sabrina Carpenter openly get mad and yell at the Trump regime for using their music and send cease and desist letters? Teddy Roosevelt's ghost must be furious at Trump, and I hope he's haunting him, and that explains Trump's increasingly erratic behavior. It's just Teddy's ghost is like in his face all the time yelling at him. Anyway, so what's really funny is that here in New York State, in the Hudson Valley, there's Donald J. Trump State Park. Not because Trump likes the great outdoors, it's because, like a dog, when it comes to fire hydrants, he just marks territory. It's pure ego, and he wants to put his name on things. And in true New York style, New Yorkers, especially here in the city, have been fighting back, trying to get his name off of this state park. It's an ongoing battle here in our state. Now, important thing to highlight in what Ken brings up. So just to frame this conversation, as we've long said on Gaslit Nation, they are looting our country and selling it for parts. One of the most famous and shocking recent examples, of course, is Qatar, one of the largest sponsors of some of the worst terrorist regimes on this planet, that even Qatar's own neighbors in the Middle East went through a massive sanction campaign, a united front sanctions campaign against Qatar to try to curb their terrorist network throughout the world, especially the Middle East, that Qatar was funding and giving refuge to, including, of course, Hamas. So Qatar gives Trump a plane that's a flying palace. Trump gives Qatar, again, one of the biggest sponsors in the world of terrorists, a close ally of Hamas and also the Kremlin. Now, Trump gives Qatar a training facility for Qatari Air Force in Idaho. That is basically an espionage base of operations for Qatar and their terrorist allies. So that same grift where Trump sells us out to the highest bidder, including to foreign nationals, that same grift is obviously being staged to play out when it comes to our national parks. Obviously, it's illegal to sell national land to foreigners, but there are ways around it, especially under this Trump regime. BlackRock, for instance, or some big Trump corporate donor could partner with a shell company, wrapped up in a shell company, wrapped up in an offshore shell company that's tied to foreign influence of some kind. But it's not just the foreign influence. It's also the big corporations here at home, the fossil fuel industries that want to expand roads and oil drilling through pristine wilderness, the timber industry that wants to expand logging. Trump's Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, called the big extraction industries salivating to exploit our land his quote unquote customers, meaning if they're ready to buy, Trump is ready to sell. This is looting. These major corporations don't know when they might get an opportunity like this again, so they are going to push in the 3 years they know they have left. Already, Trump is opening up over 175 million acres of U.S. lands, a combined area greater than Florida, California, and Georgia put together, mostly across the western states. This removes protections from 88 million acres of public land and weakens species protections across 87 million acres of wildlife habitat. The most insidious move Trump has made to open up this Pandora's box, as Ken pointed out, is to roll back the roadless area conservation rule. In June 2025, the Department of Agriculture announced it was rescinding the roadless area conservation rule, better known as the roadless rule, removing nationwide restrictions on road building and timber harvest across tens of millions of acres of national forests. And as 2025 continued, there's been a parallel story, proposed cuts and administrative strain across agencies that manage parks and forests, and massive deregulation on federal lands generally. Now, this is all going to create a big spiral that makes the looting increasingly possible. Now, to just frame it in some history, the roadless rule dates back to 2001. Its basic premise is that if you have roads, that opens up so many problems for pristine wilderness, including pollution, threatening species, putting greater pressure on already pressured migration patterns of wildlife, threatening our water supply for major cities, and on the list goes. Roads are just bad. And not only that, roads cost money to maintain. And if you don't maintain those roads, that can create all sorts of problems, especially as fire season intensifies and floods and washouts become more common because of the climate crisis. Simply put, you can't introduce building new roads when you're also eliminating the jobs and other resources to oversee existing infrastructure throughout our national parks. An internal Forest Service report obtained by the Washington Post described unpassable trails, unsafe bridges, and tied the collapse in part to steep staffing cuts and vacancy churn. There is a brain drain that is going on in our national parks, leaving them even more vulnerable to decline. And this was all massively done, accelerated by Trump and Elon Musk's doging. And if these national parks go into decline and become a financial burden, then that makes it easier for the Trump administration to justify selling them. See how that works? Now, look at the Grand Canyon, for instance. again, turned into a national park by Teddy Roosevelt. The Grand Canyon is a major international tourist hotspot. The hotels that service the hikers who stay along the South Rim just had to shut down for several weeks because the water pipes were so old and need of repair. And that's an area that is bustling with tourists from all over the world. Imagine the areas that are not. So Trump slashing maintenance budgets, letting national parks fall into disrepair, opens them up, easier looting for Trump's donors, including shady shadow foreign nationals who manage to hide their identities through America's famously opaque shell company system. If you want to see the future of public land conflict, look to Alaska. It is where we are headed. In June 2025, Reuters reported that the administration moved to expand oil and gas leasing in Alaska's National Petroleum Reserve, opening far more of the reserve to development than under Biden. Meanwhile, a recurring flashpoint is the Amber Access Road, an industrial corridor in Alaska associated with the Ambler Mining District. An AP explainer described how the route would cut through largely intact territory and endanger ecosystems and indigenous communities in a region already destabilized by climate change. And all of that is just so big oil, the fossil fuel industry, can drill, baby, drill. So look to Alaska to see how Trump is trying to aggressively get in there and help his big oil donors, his extraction industry donors, grab what they can while they can. Alaska is the future of this grift that Trump is running against our national parks all across the state. And if you want to know which park specifically will be impacted so far, go to the show notes where I link out to my reporting. So to Ken's point, the looting is made possible by allowing roads to be built in formerly pristine wilderness. That is how it starts. And they pushed through rescinding protections against new roads being built as early as June 2025. They got to work immediately. They clearly had a plan, and they're going to make the most of the time they have left to loot what they can. It's extremely dangerous and upsetting. So roadless repeal, expanded leasing, deregulatory executive actions, and massive budget slashing to pay for billionaire tax cuts. All of those things align closely with the long-standing goals of the timber, fossil fuel, and mining industries. And of course, as Ken pointed out, with the ideological nonsense of the libertarians that make up the MAGA movement, who want government to be so small it could be drowned in a bathtub. And so that's basically what they're doing to us. They're drowning us in a bathtub by trying to loot our national parks, the lungs of the earth. We need our pristine wilderness. It is part of the ecological balance that we need, or else Mother Nature is going to even punish us more than she already is with all the extreme storms and fires and so on that are ravaging us through the man-made climate crisis. So thank you so much, Ken, for your brilliant question. And to our democracy defender and higher folks, send me your questions. I love hearing from you. You take the show in a lot of interesting directions, and I love getting your questions, your comments, and building episodes around them. So thank you to everyone who supports the show. Now, if you want to listen to this full episode made for our Patreon community, be sure to subscribe at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. I'm now going to share my 3 major predictions for 2026 on where I see things headed and, where possible, what we can do about them. Prediction number 1, I predict 2026 will be a terrible year for Vladimir Putin, and here's why. 2025 was one of those years where the masks came off, like in a Scooby-Doo episode. It turns out that cute old man who runs the amusement park is actually a villain who's haunting all the kids. Masks off. And so Ukraine very clearly saw that you cannot rely on the US. You can't really rely on Europe. They're doing essentially the bare minimum. Yes, as the year came to a close, Congress got its act together and pushed through funding for Ukraine. Europe did the same, but they left the frozen Russian assets intact, even though those frozen Russian assets should go to Ukraine as reparations to help rebuild the country and fund the war effort and turn Ukraine into the porcupine to finally end this war, right? So what Ukraine is seeing is, dear Lord, our allies are doing the bare minimum, and they're fighting with each other and struggling and talking out of both sides of their mouth to even do that. So what the Ukrainians are going to do is what they do so well, and that is self-reliance. In Ukraine, self-reliance is a spiritual practice. Ukraine is a country that has had two popular uprisings overthrow the results of two stolen elections, the 2004 Orange Revolution and the 2013-2014 Euromaidan Revolution of Dignity. Self-reliance is everything in Ukraine, especially in a country where the government has tried to kill you, including in Stalin's 1933 genocide famine, the Holodomor, and just generations of oppression and killing the leading thinkers and so on. So Ukrainians have been forced to adapt a very strong survival instinct of self-reliance. They are not waiting on the Europeans and the Americans to save them. I have no doubt, just like the brilliant Operation Spiderweb, where they created a massive army of drones that then destroyed like a third of Russia's air force, they're planning some sort of operation like that, targeting Putin. Now, it's well known that Ukraine is always trying to kill Putin. Putin's always trying to kill Zelensky. They're always trying to kill each other. But I feel like this will be the year where Ukraine's like, we have no choice. We have to really come up with that massive operation to finally take this guy out.